Thank you very much, Karen, and good evening, everyone. Because the SSAT is used all over the world as the gold standard in independent school admission testing, I know that we have folks joining us on the webinar from many different time zones. So thank you so much for tuning in to tonight's webinar, whether it's actually evening where you are or morning, perhaps. This is the first year we've begun offering webinars of this type for families to really help you understand the SSAT. We have a brand new website this year on SSAT.org. We relaunched that with some really great information and resources for you. We know that admissions testing is an anxiety-provoking piece of the bigger admissions process, and unfortunately that is the nature of high-stakes admissions tests. But what we hope to do by providing sessions like these is to help demystify some of the process and give you an opportunity to ask those questions. So as Karen mentioned, please do go ahead and type your questions into that chat box on your webinar there, and we'll go ahead and try to answer some of the more general ones at the end of the session or your specific ones if needed during the webinar itself. Let's go ahead and get started. Let's talk a bit about the let's see, my screen may be frozen here, so hang on just a moment while there we go, get us going. All righty. So the SSAT does have a purpose, and its specific purpose is to help predict first-year academic success in an independent school, okay? So the SSAT is an admissions test, and we're going to talk a bit about what that means. Since schools vary widely, the SSAT is really that common measure among applicants. So as you can imagine, our schools see applicants from many different parts of the country and parts of the world. And the SSAT is that one common standardized measure of all of the applicants when they're looking through application folders. I'm really certain that many of you are aware of the differences among the schools where your children attend now. For instance, a B at your child's current school might be considered an A at another school or vice versa. And our member schools are really looking for a tool that can help them make sense of some of those transcripts that they're seeing sometimes and to better understand your students' performance relative to the pool. So it's just one of the reasons that the SSAT is really helpful. They can better understand your students as individuals and then differentiate amongst them as a group. It really does, at the end of the day, create a very level playing field amongst applicants because it is that one common piece. So I want to share this statistic with you. It was actually kind of a surprise to me when I started working at SSAT, and I really I've been in the admissions industry for years in various admissions offices, and I was never quite clear on this piece of information. So a good admission test question is only answered correctly 50% of the time. And again, when I first heard that, it was quite surprising to me. It's a startling statistic, and it really illustrates the difference between a high-stakes admission test, like the SSAT, and an achievement or a classroom test. So it's absolutely fair when students say the SSAT is hard. It's supposed to be hard. Certainly, as you're preparing your child to take the SSAT, or students out there, as you're getting ready to take that, or perhaps maybe you have and you're considering taking it again, this is a really great piece of information to know because it's really different than a classroom test or an achievement test or other tests that you may have taken in school where you know or you should know all of the information that's being presented to you in a test. So if you think about it, if a classroom teacher created the test for science, for example, and students only answered about 50% of the questions correctly, that would be disastrous. But in the world of admissions testing, that's actually exactly where you want the questions to be. If all students scored very highly, it would fail to serve the purpose of helping admissions officers make distinctions in and among applicants and seeing how much students know where their learning begins, where their learning ends. And so that really is going to be a very useful piece of information for you to know. So it's important to understand which level of the test that you may be sitting for, or your child may be sitting for. Our middle level SSAT is for students who are applying to grades 6 through 8, and they're currently in grades 5 through 7. Our upper level SSAT are students who are applying to grades 9 through 12. So currently students that are in 8th through 11th grade. So you always want to make sure that when you're registering for the test, you're entering the grade that your child is currently in. And that's how the SSAT percentile is calculated based on that grade level. So it's really, really important that you make sure that you're putting in the current grade of your student. That can get a little bit tricky in the summer times for those of you that may be applying at non-traditional times of year. So keep that in mind. And if you have questions or concerns about that, you definitely want to talk to the schools where you're applying to assure that you're taking the correct level test that they would like to see. The SSAT also has an elementary level test for students who are applying to grades 4 and 5. We're not going to be covering that elementary level test this evening, but we do have some webinars recorded on that, so I would encourage you to go visit SSAT.org to listen in to those elementary level webinars if you have questions about those particular ones. And certainly if you have questions about your score report, we're only going to speak on that very briefly this evening and the scoring of the test, but we're not going to dig into the actual score report. We do have a webinar that will be coming up on that next week once your January scores are released. So I would encourage you to look out for that one and perhaps sign up for that if that's applicable to you at this time. So let's talk about a bit of this, the scheduling and the sequence of the test. Standardized tests are often referred to in a negative way, and it's important to understand that when we use the term standardized, we're referring to how the test is administered and scored, meaning that it's always administered in the exact same way no matter where in the world you're taking it. The test is 3 hours, 5 minutes. The highly standardized nature of our test ensures that no student has an advantage on the test. And the standardized timing and rules are really important so that it's always going to be administered exactly the same way every time, no matter where you are. Let's take a look. The first part of the test is the writing sample, and that's 25 minutes long. Then students have a short 5-minute break. You should know, actually, before I move too quickly past it, the writing sample is actually an ungraded piece of the test. Students then have a 5-minute break before they get started in their test booklet with the first section, which is the first of our quantitative sections. That's the math section, and that's 30 minutes long. Then there's a 40-minute reading section. Then students have a 10-minute break, and that one's a little bit longer. Students can use the restroom. They can have their snack at that time. Then they're going to get started right back up after that break with a 30-minute verbal section, and then the second quantitative or math section, that's 30 minutes long. The final section of the test is actually our experimental section, and that's 15 minutes long. And a quick note about that, this particular piece of the test, the experimental section, is unscored. It is a combination of 16 questions, 6 from the verbal, 5 from the reading, and 5 from the quantitative sections. And the experimental section is how we field test items for future use on the SSAT. So a student doesn't have to do these 16 questions, but they will not be permitted to leave the test center early. And we really do ask that all students participate to ensure that questions on future SSATs are as good and fair as possible. So we do a lot of pre-testing of questions before they ever make it onto a test, and this is one of the ways that we do that. We do encourage students to participate in that particular section. So I'm going to go through the individual sections of the test, talk to you a bit more about the details of what you'll find in those sections, so that if you're preparing for the test, you'll be ready. And again, I would encourage you to write any questions into the comment box if you have those, and we can certainly cover them at the end as we go. So here in the writing section, that first section, as I mentioned, it's unscored and it's 25 minutes long. But because it's not scored, don't assume that it's not important. The writing sample is actually a really important part of the score report for so many of our schools, as it's the only writing sample that they'll see that they know that parents didn't help with. And parents, I know you have the best of intentions when you have students sometimes with their admissions essays, but what schools really want to see is an honest and authentic view of the students' writing skills. So it's a great opportunity for students to really show a bit about their thought process and their writing ability, their ability to form and complete a short essay with relatively little time. So understand that admissions offices do know that this is unscored. They do know that you only have 25 minutes and that there's no way you could have prepared ahead of time for a topic you didn't know about. But what they're looking for is, understanding a bit more about you and the way you write. So there are going to be two prompt choices. On the middle level SSAT, both of the prompt choices are creative, and you choose one to write about. And at the upper level, students have their choice of either the creative writing prompt or more of a traditional essay writing prompt. And so let me show you what a couple of those might look like. So on the middle level writing prompts, here are a couple of examples. They're all creative, as I mentioned. Students will have two, and they pick one that they'd like to write about. So what they're going to see is simply a statement. I decided to call home because I had never seen a bigger mess. I was walking down the street when I saw a, and as you can imagine, we expect you to either pick the story up from there. Perhaps that's the opening line in your sentence. Perhaps that's the moral of your story. Perhaps that's the last line of your sentence. You can be as creative as you like. Students really should have some fun with those writing prompts, and admissions officers really want to get a sense of who you are. This is a great place to express yourself. At the upper level, students have their choice of, again, there are two essays. They get to pick which one they would like to do. One of the topics will be more of a traditional essay. What book has had a significant impact on you and why? Or perhaps something like, if you could go anywhere in the world, where would you go and why? So you're going to have to make a decision and then back that decision up in a more traditional essay. Or you could choose to write the creative prompt. It all started in the kitchen, for his hands shook as he tried to untie it. So remember to put your best foot forward. Whichever essay prompt you choose, have some fun with it. Write an essay, write as much as you can during that 25 minutes. But really also remember that perhaps this is the first time that the admissions office is meeting you on paper, and so this may be the first time they're seeing something you've written. And because of that, I would encourage you to know your audience. Some of our students have a great graphic writing ability, or perhaps a fantastic sense of humor. And I would just encourage you to make sure that whatever you're writing is appropriate if perhaps your audience doesn't know you. What might be acceptable to the English teacher who's had you in class all year perhaps might not be to an admission officer who's reading just this one piece of writing and doesn't know you very well. So keep that in mind as you're writing those writing samples. When you get in there and you see that prompt, these are just a few tips. Again, read the prompt choices and decide which one you're going to write about. Organize your thoughts, so take a couple minutes. You will have some scratch paper that you can use there to organize your thoughts. And then write as much as you can. You are given 2 pages, which you can use. You can't go over 2 pages, and you certainly do not have to fill both pages, but we encourage you to write as much as you can in the time allotted. Grammar and punctuation counts. So again, though it's not graded, you have to remember that people are reading and reviewing this, and there certainly would be some expectations of what appropriate grammar or punctuation for your grade level would be that they'll be looking out for. Be aware they do compare. So when I say that, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes you may receive some assistance when you're writing your formal essays for your admissions folder. But be aware that admissions officers are going to be comparing those essays to the essays on your SSAT. And when they notice that they're very different, perhaps in tone or in structure, they may question you about that. So just be aware that all pieces of your application should be authentically you. Also important for you to know that you can purchase a copy of the writing sample for review. Again, though it's not graded, it's not automatically a part of your school report because it's just sent over to schools. But if you would like to see a copy, the writing sample is a $20 purchase. You can do that right from within your student account. So go ahead and, if you'd like, choose to do that. You can receive it at any time. So if you decide later on that you'd like to see a copy of that, you can go ahead and do that as well. So certainly you can do that simply by logging in. The next section of the test is the first of the two quantitative sections, so the math section. It's 30 minutes long, and it's 25 questions. Two sections. As I mentioned, this is the first of the two, and they're simply made up of the same composition of question types, algebra, geometry, and other quantitative, other math concepts, basic math. There is no order, and this is certainly in the case of our quantitative sections and each of our sections. The questions do not progress in level of difficulty. The questions are in completely random order, and they will be mixed up. So you may see questions of each type, algebra, geometry, and other math concepts, perhaps fractions or percentages. You may see those in the first section. You may see them again in the second section. They will be completely mixed up, but we're trying to get an idea of what you've seen. It's important to understand that admissions offices do realize that you're being asked questions on content that perhaps you haven't covered in school yet. You might say, well, gosh, I haven't taken algebra yet. I can't answer those questions. That's okay. It's really important for the schools where you're applying to understand that that's a subject you haven't covered yet, and so that may show in your score. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the strategy there in just a moment. But beware, you are going to see some things on there that you likely haven't covered in school before. We don't expect that you're going to learn them overnight in time for the test. That's not the intent of the test at all. So really important for you to know that as you go through the process. The next section you're going to have is the reading comprehension section, and that section is 40 minutes long with 40 questions. It's going to measure your ability to understand what you read. And the contents, the questions are going to be on the content of what you've read, the style of the author, the intent of the piece, the point of view of the piece you read. So as you're reading, figure out the main idea, and then identify some of those important details that move the narrative along or create a mood or tone. In an argument, for instance, identify the details that support the writer's opinion. Feel free to underline those key facts to help you find them easily when you're answering the questions later on. You're welcome to write in your test booklet at any time. It is your test booklet. You don't get to leave with it at the end of the day, but certainly during the test you can sort of write those things down as you're figuring questions out, or what we call active test taking, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But feel free to underline some of those key pieces of a story as you're reading through it so that you can easily identify important things when you're answering the questions at the end. So the next section on the test that you'll have is the verbal section, and that's 30 minutes long with 60 questions. It seems like a lot, but you actually will move through these pretty quickly. So the two things that you're going to be tested on in the verbal section are synonyms and analogies. The synonyms are going to test the strength of your vocabulary, and the analogies are going to measure your ability to relate ideas to each other logically. Really important for students to understand what a synonym is and to understand what an analogy is. And, synonyms, people always ask, how do I practice? How do I practice? You can certainly practice synonyms on their own. If you do have a strong vocabulary, if you're a strong reader, when you're reading something, if you don't know a word, are there context clues? Do you look it up in the dictionary? Those are great things that will help you prepare for those synonyms. Analogies are something that really do actually just take practice. Looking at different words or ideas and relating them to one another and determining what those relationships between them might be actually takes quite a bit of practice. So I would encourage you to grab one of our study guides, or perhaps even searching analogies online and looking to study some of those. Now, really important as you're getting ready for the test that you know these essential things. The first is get plenty of rest. Don't stay up all night the night before a test trying to cram and learn last-minute things. That's not the best use of your time. The next is don't forget to bring a snack and a water bottle, something to drink during the test. You're going to want that during your 10-minute break. And this is where I sort of sound like a TSA agent, but I'm going to ask that you bring that inside a clear plastic bag. You're going to have to leave that outside the test room and you're not going to be able to go into backpacks at any time once the test is started. So really important that you perhaps leave your clear plastic bag just in front of your backpack where you can grab it easily without having to reach in for it. Important for you to bring extra pencils, bring at least 3 of them. No mechanical pencils, traditional number 2, sharpen with a traditional pencil sharpener pencil. Make sure you have a good solid eraser as well. You cannot bring any cell phones into the test. You can't have them on your person. Even if they're turned off, you may not have them. No electronic devices. It's a high-level security issue for us, and I know that most students do this quite innocently, or perhaps parents may want their students to have cell phones so they can reach them afterwards. It is not allowed. So parents, your children will be fine when you drop them off at the test center. Once they're in there, we will let you know what time the test finishes. You can certainly ask the test administrator prior to starting. Be there at the end, but there is no need for you to have a cell phone during the test, and they are not allowed. In fact, if we find a student with a cell phone, it will be confiscated, and the student's test will be invalidated, and that's really important because you don't want to risk having sat for a test all of a Saturday morning only to have, a cell phone later on in that morning that's going to have that test compromised and not scored. Absolutely no digital watches. So no watches. A traditional 2-hand watch is all that you may have on you if you are having a watch with you. Make sure to bring your admission ticket, which you can print off from your student account online. You log in, there's a great little button there that allows you to print your admission ticket. The other piece that you're going to need to do is, especially if you're not testing in the United States, is to bring a passport or photo ID. Outside of the U.S., a passport or photo ID is a requirement. Inside the U.S., we actually ask you to bring something that can identify you as well. If you don't have a passport, perhaps you have a student ID or something that might have your picture on it and identify you in that way. So we do ask that you bring one, but it is absolutely required that you bring one if you're testing outside of the United States. So really important to know. Couple things to keep in mind once you get started on the test. You need to understand the directions for each section, and your test proctor, the person in the room who's going to be administering the test, will explain the directions very clearly and, again, in a very standardized way at the start of each section. Make sure you understand the directions for that particular section. And if you have questions, make sure that you're asking them before the time and section gets started, okay? Remember that some of the questions on the test will be very easy and others are going to be very difficult. Remember when I said a good admission test question is answered correctly only 50% of the time. So work quickly through the test, but you shouldn't need to rush, actually. You should be able to work through those questions pretty smoothly. If you skip a question during the test, put a question mark next to it in the test booklet, and also maybe make a little hash mark on your answer sheet. Make sure you skip the questions answer bubble on the answer sheet. Otherwise, you may get to the end of that section and realize that you've misbubbled things. So really important, put a question mark next to it in the test booklet, and maybe put a little hash mark next to it on the answer sheet so you know exactly where you are. The other thing is you want to be wary of apparently easy answers. So when you're rushing through, you may be lured into selecting an incorrect but right-seeming choice, okay? So it's not meant to be a trick question at all. The distractors, the wrong answers on the test shouldn't be luring you into answering them, but if you're rushing, they may very well be. So carefully read through all of the possible answers before you pick one. Again, as I mentioned, the questions on the test are not in any special order. They're not progressively harder. They are in completely random order, so be wary of that as well. And don't be concerned if the first couple questions that you see in a section are incredibly difficult and perhaps more of a challenge for you to answer, okay? Let's talk a little bit about guessing and formula scoring. So points, and this is something that's actually read at the beginning of a section, points are subtracted for wrong answers, but no points are subtracted if you skip a question. So if you don't know the answer, go ahead and try to make an educated guess. But if you can't make an educated guess, leave the question blank and move on to the next question so that you don't lose points. Again, as I said, these are instructions that are read to students during the test about making an educated guess as part of their test-taking strategy. And there's also a really great section on SSAT.org that our Chief Testing and Research Officer, Dr. Jinghua Liu, has created to help with this. The SSAT is a high-stakes test, and it is scored in that manner. So when parents ask for advice on how to help their children prepare, this is one of the most important items. Knowing when to skip a question rather than to guess is really useful. In a typical classroom setting, you're going to be getting the same number of points deducted regardless of whether you get a question wrong or you don't answer it. But in the case of the SSAT, skipping a question, omitting a question, actually gives you a bit of an advantage versus answering the question incorrectly. So when asked this question, I personally often recommend active test taking. So on any given question, students are going to have 5 choices for an answer. One of those answers is correct, and there are 4 distractors or wrong answers. And I would suggest crossing out at least 2 of the choices that you know are definitely not the answer, maybe even 3. And at that point, the student really is narrowed down to 2 or 3 remaining choices, and from there, likely has increased odds of making an educated guess. And so really, that active test taking, and students, this is a great tip, for any test that you're going to take in life. Really, when you know something is the wrong answer, cross it off, and then look simply at the choices that perhaps could be the answer. This is really going to help you as you're moving through the test. Let's talk a bit about how it's scored. As I mentioned, students get 1 point for every correct answer, but no points for omitted questions. Students who answer a question correctly lose 1/4 point for each incorrectly answered question. The score report that you're going to receive will show you the number of correct and incorrect answers, as well as the number of questions that a student omitted. And so parents often see that and get a bit concerned that maybe, gosh, my student skipped a number of questions. That's okay. Better to skip a question that you definitely know you don't know the answer to than to lose that 1/4 point for having it wrong. Originally developed by ETS in the 1950s, the SSAT was fashioned very much as a junior SAT, and so scoring really operates under the same principles. It is high stakes, so students want to be aware this is often the first time they're taking a test where strategy really matters. So it's important to know how that works. People always want to know, when am I going to get those scores back? They want them certainly as soon as possible. And SSAT.org is the one-stop shop for families. That's where you're going to go to get your scores. Standard tests typically are scored 2 weeks after you take the test, so you'll have those back within that time frame. Typically, you're going to see that. The only exception, actually, was this January test that we just had, the standard test on January 4th. We actually turned those around a bit faster, so we've got folks working around the clock scoring and these tests so that we can have them back to you before the January 15th admission deadline for many of our schools. So families will actually have their scores back next week so that they can have them in time to get them out to schools for the January 15th deadline. Again, SSAT.org is where you're going to find your score reports once they're ready. That's also where you're going to send those score reports to schools. And that's a really important piece. You need to make sure you send score reports to the schools where you're applying. And you can choose. That's one of the great things about score choice. You can wait to see your score report before deciding whether or not you're going to send that to a school. But you do need to follow through and actually online put in the 4-digit school code for the school where you'll be sending those and submit that to us. Really important because schools will not receive your scores otherwise. Even if you're applying to them using our standard application online, you still need to submit your scores and designate those schools as score recipients in our system. Let's talk a little bit about the score report. One of the things that I want to point out, again, is that the writing sample is not automatically a part of the score report because it's not a graded part of the test, but it is always available for purchase. So if you'd like to see a copy of that, you can order it from inside your student access portal. And again, that cost is $20. What you're going to see on your score report online is a narrative explanation of scores. So we're going to explain to you what the different pieces of the score report are. Again, that writing sample is available if you'd like it. Your score reports are available online only, so you need to log into your student account to see those. You can open up a PDF version of it so that you'll see it like this. And if you wanted to print a copy, for your records, you certainly could do that to keep on file. But a printed copy that you print out at home is not an official copy of your score report. So when you send scores to the schools where you're applying, they're going to require official score reports, and we need to send those to the schools electronically. So you simply log into your student account, put in the 4-digit code for each school where you want those sent, and we'll do the work for you. Sending score reports to schools is free as part of your test registration fee. You can send score reports to as many schools as you like at any time during the school year. So let's pull out some of the different pieces of the test that you're going to see here on your score report. There's a lot of data points available here. The first one I want to point out to you is the SSAT scaled score. So there's a scaled score range for each of the tests, middle level and upper level. And the scale for the middle level test is 440 points to 710 points with a mean score of 575. For our upper level test, there's a scaled score range of 500 points to 800 points and a mean of 650 points. Basically what that means is that for each section on the test, the middle level test, the verbal, math, and reading score, the lowest possible score in any given section is a 440, and then the highest possible score would be a 710. For the upper level, again, the lowest possible score in each section would be a 500, the highest possible score being an 800. So at the middle level, your total could be anywhere between a 1320 and a 2130. At the upper level, you could see a total from 1,500 to 2,400. And those, for parents out there who have students who perhaps taken the SAT, you might be familiar with numbers like those. This is the score that you really want to look at, actually, the scaled score number. The other piece, you're going to see a personal score range for that SSAT scaled score. And again, there's more narrative to explain this for you as well. The other piece you're going to see is the SSAT percentile. And this is often a really misleading and misunderstood number. So I would strongly encourage you, strongly encourage you to view the webinar on the score reporting that we have available. The SSAT percentile is showing you a comparison of your child's scaled score to other students' scaled scores in the same norm group. It's a norm reference test. And our norm group is students of the same grade and gender who took the test for the first time on one of our 8 standard dates in the U.S. and Canada in the previous 3 years. So that sounds a little bit confusing, but what that means, the SSAT percentile is not the percent of questions you had correct in the section. It's simply a comparison number, a norm reference that's showing you how you performed on the test, your scaled score, in comparison to other students in that same norm group who took the test in the last 3 years. So you're also going to have a breakdown in this particular section. You're going to be able to see, as I mentioned, the rights, wrongs, and omitted. So you're going to see in each particular section how many questions you had right, how many questions were answered incorrectly, and how many were omitted. So pay close attention to this section, and look at your test taker strategy there. That you omit very few questions and have a lot of wrong answers or vice versa. That's important to take a peek at. And then again, you're going to have this great section that shows you the average grade for a student of your same grade and gender. So when those percentiles may seem a bit confusing for some parents, I would encourage you to look at the average grade for a student of your child's same grade and gender. This is going to help give you an idea of where your student really falls in comparison to the students that they'll be compared to during the admission process to different schools. So in talking a bit about some of the preparation, we've certainly covered what is in each section and some of the tips that you might do to prepare there. The other piece I want to point out is that you can purchase the official guide to the SSAT. We have one for the middle level SSAT, and we have a second one for the upper level. The preparing guide is actually $35, which is quite inexpensive for a prep guide. It contains 2 full-length practice tests. And with that, you're going to have scoring instructions and explanations for each section. There's descriptions and then exercises for each question type. It talks a bit about the test-taking strategies. You can order this right through our website. Our shipping department is awesome, so you'll see that pretty quickly. When you place that order, you'll be receiving that. There are also a number of resources that you can take advantage of at SSAT.org, so I would encourage you to review our website for additional information. And then when you're ready to purchase that preparing guide, the official guide for the SSAT, go ahead and log into your student account and place that order. Again, you'll receive those pretty quickly from the time you place your order. So this is right here inside your student account. Most of you are probably familiar with this page already, but if you have not yet created an account, I would encourage you to do so. This is where you're going to manage your tests. Once you finish the test, this is also where you're going to go ahead and print that admission ticket when you need that. That's under the blue My Test icon on the left-hand side of the screen there. Once you've taken the test, you can log right in and look at your scores, My Scores. Again, those are available typically 2 weeks after the standard test date. Right from the My Scores page, you can actually send those scores directly to the schools where you're applying. For those of you at home that are completing the standard application online, you're going to be completing that process from the My Applications tab right in the middle of the screen. And I would encourage you to listen into one of our webinars about the standard application online if you have questions. You can also make inquiries to schools and request information from them. And you have a My Profile page, which allows you to maintain information about your address and the school preference types that you might have. So SSAT.org, this is your student account portal, definitely sort of the one-stop shop for you. Really important question. What statement holds true at 100% of the independent schools out there? It's that your SSAT score is not the only factor in determining admission decisions. A range of students and students with a range of SSAT scores are admitted to different schools. The testing carries different weights at each school, and schools really use the SSAT to identify capable students who are going to be successful in their program. And at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. Schools are trying to make decisions about admitting students that are going to be successful at their school. They want students to be successful. They want to help students reach their full potential. And having the SSAT score gives them an idea of that student's range of current knowledge, and it allows them to really determine if that student's going to be a good match at their school, in addition to all of the pieces of the application folder. So I don't think anything at any of our schools carries more weight than others, but I would encourage you to reach out and ask schools where you're applying, perhaps what's the range of scores for the students they're admitting. And many of our schools will be happy to share that information with you. So feel free. Again, this is certainly a challenging and perhaps anxiety-provoking piece of that admissions process, but certainly one that you shouldn't be afraid to ask questions about. So I would encourage you to do so. I'm going to open it up to questions here, but I am going to leave this screen up for just a few moments. This number here is for the SSAT call center, and during Monday through Friday, we have fantastic folks available for you in our call center that can answer your questions. They can help you with processes if you're not sure how to send a score report and you can't find that information online. I would encourage you to give them a call. You can also email us, info@ssat.org, or we have a live chat feature. So someone from our call center can answer your question right away. Visit our website at ssat.org, and you'll see a little live help or live chat rather, icon available that you can click on and ask your questions to get real-time answers during the day. So really important resources for you. I'll leave this up so that you can take this information down, and I'll open it up in case you have other questions out there, Karen.
Hi, Kate. Yes, actually, we do have quite a few questions. We had several questions regarding the skipping of questions, the omission of questions. Several people have asked how many questions you basically can skip before they start to negatively affect your score.
That's a great question. So the answer to that is there is no magic number. Students really have to use their best judgment. What's important to understand is that answering questions wrong will significantly impact a student's score. Omitting them neither gives the student points nor takes them away. So in essence, you'd be better off to leave a question blank rather than to knowingly answer it incorrectly if a student couldn't make a educated guess on the question. So there is no magic number. I can't tell you that skipping 6 is the best number to do. That's just not the case. For each student, it really does require that they know what they don't know. And when a student doesn't know the answer and they can't make an educated guess on the question, perhaps narrowing down to 2 possible answers or 3 possible answers, then I would encourage that student to skip the question.
Okay, great. Thank you. We also had a question about photo IDs. Could you please go over that section again and where it's really important for people to have photo IDs and possibly where you may not be required to have one?
Certainly. So students that are testing at any of our test centers outside of the U.S. must bring a passport photo, passport ID rather, or a photo ID to their test center. For students that are testing here in the United States, we would encourage you to bring one, but we understand that very often students in the U.S. don't always have a photo ID. Particularly if you're testing at your current school where the teachers know you or they're familiar with you, then it's going to be a little less important that you bring that photo ID because they'll know who you are. But for students that are testing at test centers where they don't know the test administrators, we encourage you to bring something if you have it. And so for kids testing here in the U.S., we encourage you to bring photo ID. Again, a school ID, any type of an ID with your name printed on it that's identifiable is useful. But for students who test outside of the U.S., you must bring a photo ID or your passport. The other really important piece, regardless of where you test, is that you need to bring your test admission ticket. That admission ticket actually proves that you're registered for the test, so we do match that up. There will be a registration ID number on that ticket that you're going to need. You'll need that to match up with your test booklet, so in your answer form, rather. So really important. Every single student taking the test must bring their admission ticket. Students who take the test outside of the United States must bring a passport or photo ID. Students who test inside the United States, again, must bring admission ticket. We would prefer you bring a photo ID, but if you do not have one, that's okay.
Thanks, Kate. We actually had several Canadian folks asking about the ID question, so I guess that's something to address as well.
Definitely. So students testing in Canada, we would encourage you to bring a photo ID if you're not testing at a school where they know you. Again, those photo IDs may be, a driver's license. They may be a school ID. Really anything that's identifying who you are or a passport would totally be an acceptable form of identification. If you don't have one of those, just check with your test center ahead of time and determine if there's something else that might be used or required.
Okay, great. I've had a number of kids asking questions about what is the best way to prepare for the quantitative section or the best way to prepare for the analogies or the synonyms. Could you speak to that briefly, please?
Sure. So I would tell students that one of the best ways to practice is actually to take a practice test. We do have 2 full-length practice tests that are available in the official guide to the SSAT that we have available for $35. You can purchase that on our website. I would encourage you to take a practice test under timed conditions. So it does require that you give up a Saturday morning or perhaps a Sunday afternoon, but give yourself an egg timer and set yourself up to take the test as though it were real-timed conditions. Really the best practice for some of the sections is active test taking. So when you're taking that test, identifying key pieces, underlining important sections in the reading passages, but in your everyday life and in school, practice active test taking. So when you're in your English class reading a particular passage, go ahead and read that passage and underline some of those main ideas or main points. You can find ways to prep for the SSAT during your everyday school day with some of the things that you're going to be sort of presented with. In terms of your vocabulary and analogies, so synonyms and analogies, synonyms really is testing your vocabulary. So, you know, one of the great ways to learn about that in the official guide, we have a fantastic section that shows you Latin and root words that sort of helps you understand some of those. So for students who don't have perhaps a phenomenal vocabulary, understanding root words is going to be really helpful for you when preparing for some of those vocab pieces in the synonym section. So you can find that again in the official guide to the SSAT. And then with analogies, you know, certainly the practice test is going to help students with that. The best way to practice analogies or prepare for analogies is to practice them, really understanding relationships. And you can find analogies everywhere, really. You have them in the official guide, but there certainly are some across the World Wide Web. So I would encourage you to do that and to simply practice analogies, because the best way to get better at them is to read and understand those.
Great. Thank you so much, Kate. That was really thorough. We had a couple of questions about the gender considerations when with the norming. Could you kind of go over that briefly?
Sure, and this is actually something, if you are interested in learning more about the score report, we do have a webinar that will be offered for families next week on interpreting and understanding your score report, how to read that score report once you get it. The gender piece is simply with regard to the SSAT percentile. The test is a norm reference test, which means that students are given that percentile score showing how their scaled score relates, you know, in reference to a particular group of like students. So what's interesting about the norm group for SSAT really is that you've got a group of students who have self-selected, really bright and talented students from across the world who are sitting for the test with the intention of applying to independent schools. So as you can imagine, they're already pretty high achieving and strong students. It's a competitive pool. The norm group is divided within that group, students who've taken the SSAT and students of the same grade and gender. So when you see an SSAT percentile score, it's simply showing your child's scaled score performance in relation to students of the same grade and gender who took our test during the previous 3 years on one of our 8 standard dates in the U.S. or Canada. So it's really sort of identifying the group of students who are applying primarily to independent schools for whom the test was primarily designed, and showing you your child's performance in relation to that group. So boys are going to be compared to boys with regard to that percentile number. Your child's SSAT scaled score is showing you actual performance, and that is without regard to gender. So you should be aware of that. You're simply seeing your child's performance on the test in the scaled score number. The SSAT percentile is the only number that breaks that out and would show you that by gender.
Thank you, Kate. We had a question or several questions about the flex test. Could you talk about what the flex test is exactly?
Oh, sure. That's a great question. So people often ask, well, what's the flex test? Is it the SSAT? What is it? Really important for you to know that each year there are 9 versions of the middle level SSAT, and there are 9 versions of the upper level SSAT. 8 of those versions are given on our standard test date at the middle level and at the upper level. And then the 9th version of the test is given on a flexible date, meaning that an admission office can give that flex test at any other date other than those 8 standard ones we have during the year. So the flex simply stands for flexible, meaning that the test doesn't happen on one of the 8 standard dates. But it is, in terms of the test content and creation, in essence, the 9th version of the test. So there isn't a difference in terms of the content or things that you'd be tested on that test that makes it any different. It simply is the 9th version of our test each year.
Thanks, Kate. We had a question from someone asking if any of the versions of the test are harder than any other versions.
That's another great question. The answer is yes. At any given time, each individual test may be slightly more difficult or slightly easier than one another. And the way that works, we actually have a process in our scoring department that we do what we call equating. And again, I would encourage you to listen into our webinar on score reports and understanding your score report to learn a bit more about that. But in essence, because of the way our tests are created, we want to make sure that no matter what test form the student takes, whether they take a form that might be a little bit more difficult or a form that's a little bit easier, their scaled score would be exactly the same, showing their same ability no matter what version of the test they're taking. So our tests are equated across the different forms to account for the different difficulty levels that you might see. And again, that's a sort of a brief answer to a much larger question, but certainly can learn more about that process and the way we work with that equating across our different test forms year to year and within the same year during our score report session.
Thank you, Kate. In a related question, I have someone who is in 8th grade taking the upper level test and wondering how much harder it is going to be for them to take as the youngest student taking that test.
Yeah, sure. So that's another great question. What's important for students to realize at either the middle level or the upper level is that there are a number of grade levels taking each different test. And so when I said that on average a good admission test question is answered correctly 50% of the time, it's also important to realize that we expect that perhaps 8th graders may not know as much as a 9th grader taking the test or a 10th grader taking the test. So what that means is when I look at the scaled scores of an 8th grader versus a 9th grader versus a 10th grader, I would expect to see a lower score on a student in 8th grade than I would expect to see for a student in 9th grade, because I suspect that 9th grader has probably had a little bit more exposure to, for instance, some of the math section or math questions in our quantitative section. So it's not a matter of harder. The test is not so much harder for you as you're going to be experiencing probably more questions on the test that you haven't yet encountered in school, and that's okay. When you don't know the answer and you can't make an educated guess, go ahead and omit the question. That's going to be really important for you to know what you don't know. And instead of simply seeing that as hard, understand that perhaps that's the question that a 9th grader could answer easily or a 10th grader could answer easily, but perhaps you as an 8th grader aren't quite ready for that question yet, and you could skip it if you couldn't make an educated guess.
Okay, thanks so much, Kate. I know we have a couple of outstanding questions that we have some panelists working on right now. We had some questions about special accommodations, and whether special accommodations have to be given in the environment that they are currently in.
Okay. Well, I will try to answer those questions, and perhaps if I don't answer it thoroughly to the person asking the question, if I don't answer this to your satisfaction, please follow up with us in the call center because we'd be happy to help. The special accommodations for students can be requested to accommodate really a variety of learning needs and learning styles. In some cases, the student simply needs to use a laptop for their writing sample. In other cases, the student may request time and a half, so they're taking the test with the allotted time plus 1/2 time in each section. Other students may require, a small room, or perhaps we have a diabetic student who needs access to insulin or snacks during the test. There are a variety of accommodations that can be made. I would encourage you to take a look on SSAT.org to find out more about the way those work. But in essence, if a student receives a special accommodation regularly in school and they have testing on file to support that accommodation that they're regularly given in school, then they can request to have those same special accommodations when they take the SSAT. In order to do that, there is a process. Students do have to request them through our online portal. They do need to request those before they register for a test. They need to find a test site that is willing to accommodate or accept a student with special accommodations, because not every test center has the space for a student perhaps to stay for time and a half, or to take the room in to sit for the test in a private room or a smaller setting. So important that you start that process early when you're looking for special accommodations to make sure that we can find a test center that accommodates you. Once you do that, you actually request accommodations from your school. So your school has to approve and authorize those accommodations for us before we can allow you to register for a test using them. Important for you to know, students with special accommodations, they are not disclosed. They cannot be disclosed to the schools where you're applying. So on your school report, there's no indication that perhaps you had a scribe, you had someone reading the test to you, or perhaps you had time and a half. That will not be disclosed to the schools where you're applying. The only accommodation that a school may see, if you have it, is for those students who are approved to use a laptop for their writing sample, in which case when the schools see your writing sample, they're going to see something that's been typed and printed instead of something that's handwritten. But that's actually a pretty common one. And I think personally, when I was in the admissions office, I much rather would have seen a printed essay rather than one that I couldn't read or that wasn't legible if a student had needed that accommodation. So not too concerning with that one. But important for you to know that we cannot disclose any accommodations you request on the test to the schools where you're applying. The important piece to that is also that you really should make sure the schools where you're applying know if you've asked for special accommodations on the test, or if you'll need special accommodations once you attend their school if you're admitted. And that's really, really important, because you certainly don't want to be accepted and admitted to and then enroll in a school that can't meet your educational needs. So really important to be honest and upfront with schools when you have accommodations that you need on a regular basis in school. When it comes to testing for taking the SSAT with special accommodations, many of your questions can actually be answered on our website, SSAT.org. But if you do have questions that you're not finding answers to there, I would encourage you to reach out to us and ask those questions directly through our website.
Okay, thank you, Kate. I just did want to reiterate, because we had a couple questions about it while you were speaking, that the laptop is only for people that are approved for special accommodations with a laptop. So if you're taking the test just normally, we do not have laptop use for that. You have to be approved for special accommodations in order to use a laptop.
Exactly. Apologies if I wasn't clear there.
And we are about up in our time allotment here, and I would encourage you, if your question has not been reached or if you have additional questions, to please contact us at info@ssat.org, or as Kate mentioned, ssat.org, the website, has quite a wealth of information, and chances are very good that you can find the answer to your question on the website. We also have the chat available with our expert customer service team. They're available to talk to you during the weekdays. You can check the Contact Us page on SSAT.org for details of when the chat is open in the Contact Center. Kate, I'd like to thank you so much for presenting such a helpful webinar to our attendees. We're going to be recording this webinar, and it will be made available on the Help Center page on SSAT.org. I wish you all good luck, and have a great night.
Thanks, Karen.